To the third Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities. Professor Carlo Fonseka, as you know, was a teacher, a thinker, a writer, a researcher, a lyricist, and a public and political intellectual. As the academic procession enters the hall, I kindly request you to stand. I'd now like to invite the Head of Department, Medical Humanities, Dr. Santushya Amrasurya, Senior Lecturer from the Department of Medical Humanities, Dr. Santushya Fernando, and Chairperson of the Humanities, Society and Professionalism stream, Professor Diniti Fernando, to welcome our dignitaries for today, our chief guest, Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, our orator for today, Emeritus Professor of Physiology, and former Vice-Chancellor of the University of Ruhuna, Professor Susirith Mendis, and wife of the late Professor Carlo Fonseka, Mrs. Pearl Fonseka. To deliver the welcome address, I now invite Dr. Santhosh Yamarasuriya, Head of Department, Medical Humanities.
I warmly welcome you to the Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities of the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo for 2023, and it has been a pleasant task for the Department of Medical Humanities to organize this oration on behalf of the faculty. As some of you would know, the Department of Medical Humanities was established on 9th August 2016. Subsequent to the inauguration of this oration in 2021, we resolved that it would be very meaningful for it to coincide with the anniversary of the department, celebrating both our department as well as the life of an exceptional personality, Professor Carlo Fonseka, who has been a strong proponent of the medical humanities and an advisor during the initial years of our existence as a department. So today, during our so-called birthday month of the department, we hold the 3rd annual Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities. As always, we are very pleased to have with us the family of Professor Carlo Fonseka, and especially Mrs. Pearl Fonseka, the wife of Professor Fonseka. While we honor the great mind of Professor Fonseka, we also honor and appreciate those who created the space in which this great mind incubated and rejuvenated, that is, his family. We thank you for your presence today. We welcome our Vice Chancellor, Professor H.D. Karunaratne, the chief guest of this event. Professor Karunaratne, we are all very well aware of your immensely hectic schedule as the VC of this university, and we are grateful to you for always trying your very best to accept the invitations extended to you from this faculty and your unstinted support in all our activities. We are very grateful to Professor Susirith Mendis, our orator for today, for accepting our invitation to deliver the Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities as a student, colleague in physiology, and as someone with similar vision and insight as Professor Carlo Fonseka about the role of humanities in medical education. We welcome our previous orators, Professor Saroj Jayasinghe and Professor Anuj Fernando, heads of departments, professors and academics, administrative and non-academic staff of the faculty and the University of Colombo. I also very warmly welcome to our faculty our guests and well-wishers. Since its inauguration in 2021, this is the first time that this oration is being organized as a fully on-site event, and we are extremely pleased to see the presence of many of our distinguished invitees who bring warmth and character to this event. A special welcome to our students who are joining us today for the oration. We appreciate their presence today, and we hope that this event will help to broaden their perspectives and horizons. The Department of Medical Humanities, though very much in its formative years, has made several important strides during its short history. While being the first Department of Medical Humanities to be established in the Sri Lankan university system and amongst the first in the region, it is now championing the incorporation of medical humanities in health professional education in Southeast Asian region under the patronage of the WHO Sierra office, with these attempts being led by none other than our founding head, Professor Saroj Jayasinghe. Therefore, it is with great pride that we celebrate the 7th anniversary of the Department of Medical Humanities. It is also with deep gratitude that the department remembers Professor Carlo Fonseka today. He provided steadfast support throughout our very early years. He was the natural choice to be the first resource person in the initial lecture discussion series organized by the department to discuss its scope. I also recall how, despite being sick at the time in July 2018, he attended the first international conference in medical humanities that the department organized. The conference was in this very lecture theater. He was armed with a shawl as he found the venue too cold and was unable to partake of any of the refreshments. Yet, he was most enthusiastic to attend our sessions and continued to be very attentive and engaged throughout. If you can just switch the slide. This is a picture that is very precious to us and would be very special to many. It was taken on 15th August 2019, just over 2 weeks before Professor Fonseka's demise, when Prof. Saroj, Tushara, our management assistant, whom you don't see because he was the one taking the photograph, and I visited Professor Carlo Fonseka at the NHSL. Captured here is the moment he handed over a donation of rupees 1 million to the department that he had collected in memory of his nephew, the late Kumaratunga, which he wanted us to utilize in activities to develop the department. It is very touching that despite his deteriorating health, the continuity and development of our department figured in Professor Fonseka's mind, and we are very pleased to hold this oration in his honor. We thank all of you for gracing this occasion and helping us to honor Professor Carlo Fonseka, the multifaceted personality and above all, exceptional human being.
Now, to address today's gathering, I invite to the podium Dean, Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo, Vidyajyoti, Senior Professor Vajra H.W. Disanayaka.
Good morning, everyone. Vice Chancellor, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratna, the orator this morning, Emeritus Professor Susirith Mendis, former deans of the faculty, fellow academics, colleagues from the medical profession and other professions, distinguished invitees, Mrs. Pearl Fonseka and other members of Professor Carlo Fonseka's family, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to echo the sentiments of my colleague, Professor Dr. Santhushi Amarasuriya, and welcome you to the third Carlo Fonseka Oration. My mind goes back to 2021 when we had the first or the inaugural oration amidst the COVID pandemic with all the restrictions in the physiology lecture theatre, where in the 1970s and early part of the 1980s, we all know that Professor Carlo Fonseka wielded influence on generations of medical students in a manner which is unparalleled of a teacher in a faculty of medicine. Myself and my colleagues and others who joined the faculty in the 1990s were the unfortunate lot who did not have that opportunity. Because by that time, Professor Fonseka has gone over to Caledonia and he was there. I myself had the good fortune of having many encounters with Professor Fonseka because of the work that he did with the Sri Lanka Medical Association, and later because of some of the work that I did in ethics and the kind of friendship, professional friendship that we built up. I always remember the day when I was seated in my office in the genetics unit down in the ground floor of the pathology building, where Professor Fonseka walked into my office. He said that he has come to meet me to ask for my help. So I got up and said, "Sir, how can I help you?" He said, "Vajira, a few months ago, the Sri Lanka Association for the Advancement of Science invited me to give the Kotegoda oration, and I told them as the title, 10 Commandments for Researchers." I had 10 written up in a little note that I had made, but I have lost that note. I need your help to work out 10 commandments because the oration is coming up next month. So I walked with him down to the Ethics Review Committee room and pulled up a few books and gave him, and both of us sat, and he, within a few minutes, worked out 10 commandments, and he said, "I've got enough now, I know what to say." And unfortunately, I couldn't attend that oration because I was abroad, but I think he used that in that oration. So that encounter, I think I will remember for the rest of my life, and in the, I know this is probably the third time that I'm repeating this also, because I did that in the first oration as well. And so thank you for bearing with me, because I knew that there were a lot of others who had not listened to that story and thought I will repeat that. But that highlights the complete personality of Professor Carlo Fonseka, the gentle human being he was. And it is apt that the faculty recognize his contribution to medical education as well as to humanities in the broader sense through the Carlo Fonseka Oration that we have annually. And I'd like to congratulate my colleagues in the Department of Medical Humanities for instituting this oration and ensuring that it continues year after year. I'd like to thank the Vice Chancellor for the support that he continues to give us, and in spite of the many invitations that we extend to him, finding the time to come. He's going to be in this, I think, faculty 3 times this week. That is the commitment that the Vice Chancellor is showing this faculty. Thank you very much, sir, for taking the time off from your busy schedule to be with us. I would also like to thank our orator this morning, Professor Susirith Mendis, who I know has delivered many thought-provoking oration. Sir, we look forward to another one of those thought-provoking orations from you. And I'm sure that will get us thinking in a different direction as we try to grapple with not only providing health services in a resource-constrained setting, but also delivering medical education in a resource-constrained setting, overcoming all the challenges that we face today. And I always say these are not challenges unique to Sri Lanka, but we see them across the world, all over the world. And how we overcome those challenges is what the future will judge us, not the complaints that we make about the lack of everything, but how we overcome those challenges. And I'm sure some of the things that you say today may also inspire us in that direction. So with those words, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your presence here this morning. Your presence is a tribute to Professor Carlo Fonseka as well as a tribute to our faculty and the alma mater for many of you who are here this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite our chief guest at the 3rd Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities, Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, to address the gathering.
Very good morning to all. Senior Professor Vajradhi Sanayaka, Dean of the Faculty of Medicine. Today, orator, Emeritus Professor Susirith Mendis, the former Vice Chancellor of the University of Ruhuna. Heads of the departments, all senior professors, emeritus professors, other academic members, and all staff members. It is a very important landmark day for the particularly Department of Humanities in the Faculty of Medicine. We know that the Professor Carlo Fonseka rendered a very good service to the University of Colombo as well as to the nation as a human being. We know that Professor Carlo Fonseka has awarded the Japanese Emperor Award, which is, there are various type of Japanese Emperor Awards. I think the Professor Carlo Fonseka got the highest award from Sri Lankan. So why? Because his contribution to the society and people of Sri Lanka, such appreciation was given to the Professor Carlo Fonseka. So we know that not only within Sri Lanka, the outside world also, the people knew Professor Carlo Fonseka's contribution to the university and the country. So therefore, we don't need to reiterate it, but we know that by keeping this kind of oration, that we practice our gratitude particularly for him in the contribution made to the medicine education in Sri Lanka. So it's a very good practice. We know, being the first Ceylon Medical College and the first faculty of University of Colombo, Faculty of Medicine is forerunner for many things, and you are the largest faculty as well as, of course, in terms of research, and you are the forerunner of all the faculties in Sri Lanka. So therefore, this kind of events, landmark events, organizing is very important. And of course, in the calendar, as I see that Professor Vajradhi Sanayaka always helping and doing many activities in the faculty. So there are, I think their calendar is very tight, the many things going on, but remembering our earlier contributors, very much important thing. So we appreciate that. And of course, Madam Carlo Fonseka, we also, of course, have gratitude towards the Carlo Fonseka family who contributed to the university and the country. Thank you very much for inviting me. So we will continue this kind of activities further and further. Thank you.
Now, I call upon Dr. Santushi Amarasuriya to read the citation and introduce the orator at the third Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities. Over to you, Madam.
It is my pleasure to introduce the orator of the Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities for 2023, Professor Susirith Mendis. As you will all agree, Professor Mendis is not someone who really needs to be introduced, and his portfolio would be difficult to encapsulate into a few minutes. However, when I reached out to him to seek information for this citation for the sake of formalities in this oration, he furnished me with an ultra-condensed version of his career. So now I am tasked instead with the job of using these small tidbits of information to try and do justice to his remarkable career. If one were to state that this faculty is inundated by royalists, Professor Mendis is yet another flag bearer of this statement, being a proud product of Royal College and making his royalist imprint on the faculty. His years at the faculty would have been enriched by his learnings from Professor Carlo Fonseka, who was on the academic staff at the time. Professor Mendis graduated from this faculty in 1978 with a second-class honors and distinction in physiology in the second MBBS exam, the latter perhaps being one of the early indicators of his subsequent deep dive into the academic pursuit of physiology. He joined the Department of Physiology at the University of Ruhuna in 1980 as an academic. This was at a time when preclinical training was conducted at the faculties of medicine in Colombo or Peradeniya. Therefore, Professor Mendis was faced with a choice between these two locations. When I spoke to him over the phone yesterday, he told me of his decision to choose Peradeniya over Colombo for his teaching, as he was already familiar with Colombo through his undergrad years. While many of us may have gravitated towards familiar grounds, Professor Mendis instead chose something new and different and was willing to work hard to make his mark. He did a split PhD between the University of Ruhuna and the University of London and Middlesex Hospital Medical School, and was awarded a PhD at the University of Ruhuna in 1990. During his tenure as an academic, he was at the helm of both his faculty and university, being the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine Ruhuna from 1996 to 2005, and Vice Chancellor of the University of Ruhuna from 2007 to 2013, and was awarded Emeritus Professorship in 2017. He also played an instrumental role in the establishment of the Staff Development Center of the University of Ruhuna, being its founding director. He spent his sabbatical leave at the Gulf Medical University, Ajman of the UAE, and was the co-chair of the Medical Education Unit while being a professor of physiology. He also received 2 WHO fellowships on medical education to the Department of Research in Health Education, University of Connecticut Health Center in 1998, and the Center for Clinical Bioethics at the University of Illinois in 1997. He has served in many important national posts, including Chairman, Committee of Vice Chancellors and Directors of Sri Lanka, and Chairman, Board of Management, Postgraduate Institute of Medicine, University of Colombo. He is currently a Senior Professor in Physiology and Director of Medical Education at the General Sir John Kuthalawala Defence University. Professor Mendis has many keynote addresses, scientific publications, and communications to his name. However, what stands out when you read the topics of these is that apart from his core expertise and experience in the area of physiology is his deep interest and pursuit of knowledge in the areas of ethics and professionalism, humanities, human rights, and person-centered care. In fact, if not most or all of the orations he has delivered previously have focused on topics such as empathy in the practice of medicine, music as a metaphor in the practice of medicine, conflict of interest, the relationship between the industry and science. His writings have not been limited to his scholarly work. He is considered a public intellectual, and his numerous writings in the print media dissect and analyze topics ranging from the practice of medicine and professionalism therein to broader social phenomena such as violence and ragging. His recognition of the importance of humanities education is also reflected in many of his writings, including the following medical analogy that he used once to describe a university. I quote Professor Mendis, who says, "The sciences, medicine, engineering, agriculture, applied and pure sciences, form the bones, sinew, and muscles and blood that runs in the veins of a university. The humanities and the arts must provide the spirit and the soul of a university." It is in this very vein of providing this spirit and soul in medical education that he has been amongst the advocates of humanities education at the Faculty of Medicine, Ruhuna. He also provided his expertise during the process of developing the scope of the Department of Medical Humanities at our own faculty, through his contributions as a resource person at the preliminary lecture discussion series organized prior to the establishment of our department. He was also a resource person at the International Conference on Medical Humanities organized at the faculty in 2018. Professor Mendis' track record of immersion in the humanities, ethics, and professionalism, and his following words reflect his core values related to medical education. I once again quote his words when he attempted to explain his teaching practices. He states, "Using my lectures in physiology to exhort students to develop values and ethics of professional conduct in consonance with expected standards of doctors and to be not swayed or enticed by the lure of filthy lucre that has engulfed a large proportion of the medical professionals. Without question, such sentiments would also be very close to the heart of Professor Carlo Fonseka himself, who tried to infuse, as Professor Mendis once called it, the soul and spirit into education. We are very pleased to welcome our orator for today of the third Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities, Professor Susirith Mendis, to deliver his oration titled Medicine, the Humanities, Carlo and I. I invite on stage the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine, Colombo, Senior Professor Vajra Disanayaka, to award the Orator's Medal to Professor Susirith Mendis.
I now invite Professor Susirith Mendis to garland the photograph of Professor Carlo Fonseka to pay tribute to the great legend. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the highlight of today's proceedings. I cordially invite Emeritus Professor Susirith Mendis to deliver the third Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities.
Mrs. Pearl Fonseka and the family of Professor Carlo Fonseka, the Vice Chancellor, the Dean, the Head of Department of the Department of Medical Humanities, friends, colleagues, and students. It is indeed a great privilege and pleasure for me to be here this morning to deliver the third Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities. I must particularly thank my good friend and colleague, Professor Saroj Singh and Dr. Santoshi and the Dean and the faculty for inviting me and giving me this privilege. Let me commence, as I usually do, with a quote. This is an interesting quote that comes from an article in the Lancet, Literature and Medicine, Physician Writer. The clinical gaze has much in common with the artist's eye. In a previous oration I did, as mentioned by Santoshi, which was titled Music as Metaphor in the Practice of Medicine, I found that music as metaphor, a novel idea that has some very interesting points of coalescence between music and medical practice. So here I am, trying to tie up poetry and song and a myriad other things that made Carlo what he was with the medical mindset. It is not with any sense of disrespect that I titled my talk as Carlo instead of Professor Carlo Fonseka. It is to signify the deep sense of togetherness, comradeship in fact, that I had that I use the word that is beloved to us all as students, friends, and the public at large. The world loved him by that name. I seek your kind indulgence if the word I in the title and this narrative exceeds your limits of tolerance. It is necessary for me to connect the two individuals in the title. Where should I start? Should I echo the infamous or famous words of Julie Andrews and say, let's start at the very beginning, because it is a very good place to start. But then, what is the beginning? It has to be where Carlo and I connected for the first time in this infinite firmament. It was the news he created when he confronted the gullible and their gods, when he challenged that firewalking can be done by man without recourse to the goodwill of unseen powers. For the first time I had heard the name Carlo Fonseka, never to be forgotten ever again. I saw him first physically at the medical education exhibition, medical exhibition in 1970, held to celebrate 100 years of the University of Colombo Medical School. We were A-level students then. He was still exhibiting the scam of firewalking under laboratory conditions. As the title predicts, I will not take on the tradition of orations, of speaking about Professor Carlo Fonseka before I delve into the subject of my talk today. Instead, I will weave into the narrative who Carlo was to me, who I think Carlo truly was, more than perhaps who Carlo was to the public at large. I got to know Carlo close at hand in 1973 when I entered the Colombo Medical School as a student. And Carlo gave us the introductory lecture in physiology. This is what he looked like then. Some of us used to go to his room after his lectures, asking some silly questions just to have some chat with him. He knew the purpose of our visits. He knew that we were just asking some silly question because we enjoyed just being in his room and talking to him and listening to his wisdom. I remember his introduction to the scientific method in Sinhala, a phrase he used, Indriya Gochara Pratyakshayan, inputs to our sense organs, to ingrain into us that our sensors are the sure and only sources of perceiving reality. Still, that phrase rings strong somewhere in the deepest recesses of my mind. I learned two things that day. Firstly, his supreme oratorical skills, calm, soft-spoken, succinct, and eloquent. Secondly, the beauty and versatility of the Sinhala language. And the most unique feature of his oratory, if you have noticed it, the pregnant pause. The gesture before the word. I have tried my best to emulate his clarity of speech and enunciation to the best of my ability as a lecturer and as a public speaker. I believe with some moderate success. I was hardly in any contact with him during the intervening years after our second MBBS until the final year in 1976. In November 1976, something dramatic happened that had never happened before in the university history of Sri Lanka. A student, Veera Surya, of the University of Peradeniya, was shot dead by the police, and the universities in Sri Lanka erupted in violent protest. So did we in Colombo. The police surrounded the faculty, and hundreds of policemen were on Kinsey Road and the vicinity. The students were angry. The police were hostile, and a possible clash and violence was imminent. Carlo came and interceded and took us angry students towards the anatomy block. And the then quadrangle, which was a car park and an animal house, where one day the python had escaped the animal house and was under the grass, which had not been cut for months. And he was discovered right in the center here, a big python. Well, that was the quadrangle then. So he took us there, and to pacify us and also to take us away from the tensions, he spoke to us. And once calmed, recited a poem in Sinhala, which I came to know later as his translation of the Bertolt Brecht poem, A Worker's Speech to a Doctor. As a final year student, nothing resonated in my mind and heart more than Carlo reciting those memorable words. That was my introduction to Bertolt Brecht. I hadn't known about him before. It was not Henry Jayasena's adaptation of the Brecht play Caucasian Chalk Circle, the Hunawate Katava. Though I had seen the play, but not actually on stage, but on TV, the socio-political depths that defied my understanding about that play was because I was a callow youth. It is with Carlo's reading of Pidithiyakugen Vaidyavarekutta, his translation, that I found the true Bertolt Brecht, a socialist humanist. But more importantly, my regard, respect, and admiration for Carlo grew. A few years later, maybe 81, when I was a lecturer in physiology at the Faculty of Medicine, Peradeniya, for 3 years, I met him when he was speaking at a public seminar on the controversy of the North Colombo Medical College. I introduced myself after the lecture, and during conversation I told him about my memory of the poem he recited at a critical juncture in November 1976, almost 5 years before. I asked him for his translation of the Brecht poem, as I couldn't get it out of my mind. I asked him for a copy. He promised to send it to me, and he did. He posted it. I still have the faded copy, typewritten, that he sent me over 40 years ago. That you won't be able to read it is that 40-year-old faded copy of the letter he sent me, the poem he sent me. I subsequently got it retyped and put it up on the notice board, as I was head of department by that time in Ruhuna, and put it up on the physiology notice board, and it remained in the physiology notice board every day for over 20 years. So that students, when they come to check on their tutorials, or check on their schedules, they also see this on the notice board. I had by then traced the original Brecht poem. I have a few copies printed out for anyone interested in it, and Carlo's translation. If possible, I will give it to Santushya soon. I think I have forgotten to bring it today. I think it is appropriate that I recite this poem as Carlo recited it on that tenseful day in November 1976. Here goes. පීඩිතයෙකුගෙන් වෛද්‍යවරයෙකුට බර්ටෝල් බ්‍රෙෂ්ට් පරිවර්තනය මහාචාර්ය කාලෝ ෆොන්සේකා. අප පෙළෙන රෝගයේ හේතුව අපි දනිමු. අප ලෙඩ වූ කල සුව කරන්නේ ඔබලු. දසවසරක් තුළ ජනතා ශ්‍රමයෙන් නිපැයුණු අගනා සරසවිවල ධනස්කන්ධයක් වැය කර ලෙඩුන් සුව කිරීම ඔබ හැදෑරුවේලු. එබැවින් ලෙඩුන් සුව කිරීම ඔබ දත යුතු. ඔබට අප සුවපත් කළ හැකිද? අප ඔබ වෙත පැමිණි කල ඔබ අප වැරහැලි ඉවත් කර අප සිරුරු නලාවෙන් පිරික්සති. අප පෙළෙන රෝගයේ හේතුව සොයනුවස් අප වැරහැලි දෙස බලන එක බැල්මෙන් නලාවට වඩා කරුණු සැපයනු ඇත. අප සිරුර වැහැරෙන්නේ අප ඇඳුම් වැරහිලි වන්නේ එකම රෝග මූලයෙන්නේ. අප ඇඟපත රිදෙන්නේ දියසීරාව නිසායයි ඔබ පවසති. අප පැල්පත් බිත්තියේ ඇති පැල්ලමට හේතුව වන්නේද දියසීරාවමයි. එබැවින් කියනු මැන දියසීරාවට හේතුව කිම. වැඩ අපිට වැඩි නිසා ගුණ ආහාර අඩු නිසා අප ඇටකටු පෑදිලා. තරවන්නට කියා ඔබ අපට කියනවා. ඉබිනයිදට නොතෙමෙන්නට කීමේ ඇති ඵලය කිමද? අප වෙනුවෙන් වැය කරනා ඔබේ කාලය කොයි තරම්ද? එය පවසයි ඔබ මැදුරේ එක පලසක වටිනාකම. 5000ක් රෝගීන්ගේ ගත්තු සල්ලි එයි අගයයි. මේ තත්වය අරඹය ඔබ නිවැරදි කරු කියා නිසකයි ඔබ කියනවා. අප පැල්පත් බිත්තියේ තෙත පැල්ලම කියන්නේ ඒ ටිකමයි දෙයියනේ. That is not Carlo Fonseka. That is Bertolt Brecht, translated by Carlo Fonseka. Together with this faded typewritten copy of his translation, he also sent me another of his translations, also a poem by Bertolt Brecht. It was titled Vimuktigi. I wasn't sure what it was until decades later when it came to light of what it actually was. That's what he sent me. The faded 40-year-old typewritten document. It was Carlo's excellent translation of the Brecht poem on the Lotus Sutra, the parable of the burning house. Many of you must know of the sutra wherein the Buddha spoke of a burning house and how the inmates ask questions, totally oblivious to the urgency of the need to avoid getting burnt. That is too long to recite, so I will not. The question that comes up is why Carlo felt the need to translate these two Brecht poems. Did he translate other poems? I don't know. But the reason is clear to me. It speaks volume of Carlo's innate humanism and his political philosophy, the dual values by which he lived most of his life. The academic, the scientist, the political animal, and the rationalist combines with the aesthete that made Carlo the Renaissance man, the polymath, the man inhabiting many a world of human endeavor. Carlo had an excellent academic record in the Colombo Medical School, obtaining a first-class honors pass in the final MBBS, breaking all the previous records, with many gold medals. He also won the Perry Medal awarded once every 3 years to the best performance at the second MBBS examination for those 3 years. Do you have that Perry Medal now? Yeah, okay. So it still goes on. Rarely, if you observe him carefully, you will get a glimpse of his pride and self-esteem, even a little bit of arrogance he had of his intellectual prowess. He did, on those rare occasions, make sardonic and derisive comments of lesser intellects. The classic one is about a previous Minister of Health, which unfortunately I can't repeat here. But it was always light-hearted good humor. But he was mostly a very unassuming man with great humility and intellectual modesty. Humility is a sign of greatness, said Ramakrishna Paramahansa over 150 years ago. Carlo is one who comes very close to that description of both humility and greatness. Usually in many a country, both governments and citizens are perturbed when there are deaths in police custody. But unfortunately at this time in our history, there is a great uproar about deaths in hospitals. Just last month, I wrote an article in the Island newspaper about these deaths in hospitals and the relevance, large issues about medical negligence and medical error. Hence, it is opportune that we seek the wisdom of Carlo. Perhaps he is the only medical academic who has publicly declared and admitted to his mistakes. Those of us who have read his article in the BMJ, volume 313, December 1996, pages 1640 to 42, titled "To Err Was Fatal," would know exactly the extent of his humility, wherein he wrote about 5 mistakes he made that had fatal consequences. Since Carlo knew about my interest in medical ethics, he one day gave me a copy of that article and told me to read it so that we could discuss the ethical implications of each of those 5 episodes at a later date. Unfortunately, that date never came. Other events intervened, and it was put in the back burner. It is one of my great regrets that I didn't have the opportunity to discuss the concept of medical error with him. In my humble view, his article is an absolute essential read for all doctors. I wish to bring 2 quotes from Carlo's seminal article. The first, the boxed key messages. I'll enlarge it. These are the 5 key messages. All doctors are fallible. The natural reaction of doctors to their errors is to hide them or to rationalize them away. It is unscientific and unethical to refuse to face our errors. There is no cathartic ritual in our profession to expiate the sense of guilt generated by our errors. And the final, since knowledge grows mainly by error recognition, facing our errors squarely is the path to medical wisdom. The second in the final paragraph of his article, there is great humility and true humbleness in this that I have never seen or read ever anywhere. That's the final para of his article. Let me enlarge that. When all is said and done, a jibe at my expense must be anticipated. Although Alexander Pope did indeed famously preach that to err is human, to forgive is divine, it will be murmured that only a fool will err fatally 5 times in 36 years. So the prospect must be squarely faced. This paper may embody nothing more or less than the confessions of a fool. If, however, by confessing to the world, a fool could help to promote ever so slightly the ideal of error-free patient care, I believe that the fool has a scientific and ethical duty to confess. How many of us in this audience, to whatever profession we belong, will have the humility, the strength of character, and the courage to tell the whole world what Carlo said of himself? I bet there would be none. Let me tell you another little story before I finish with Carlo and his extreme humility. This is the first time I am making this public in 30 years. I was once invited by the PGIM to a seminar to deliver a lecture to all PG students on how to face a viva voce examination. Carlo was in the audience. It must have been some date in October 1992. I received a letter from Carlo dated 3rd November 1992, about a month after. You may be able to read that, but I'll read it. My dear Susirith, I was hoping to see you at the annual sessions of the FISSOC, but you didn't come. Well, would you be so good to send me photocopies of the excellent transparencies, those are pre-PowerPoint excellence transparency days, you used in your superb talk on the viva voce examination. I have to speak on the subject on 20th November. And what I'm proposing to do is to rehash Susirith M because I can't do any better. Warmest regards, as ever, Carlo Fonseka, Medical College, Ragama, my shortest current address. This was an extremely polite untruth. I was sure that he was certainly could do far better. But his extreme humility lies in the fact that he addressed a letter in such a way to one of his mediocre students. Carlo never stinted on superlatives when he cared for someone. So, what he says, excellent transparencies, superb talk. It was neither excellent transparencies nor a superb talk. Nevertheless, I was moved by his salutation at the end. Warmest regards, as ever. He used to often introduce me as my brilliant student. He knew, and I knew, that it was a wild, gross exaggeration. I was quite far from brilliant. Let me change track now into an aspect that has held me spellbound still. Here is a whole philosophy of life, of love, a clear political philosophy, and the ponderings of the universality of impermanence in verse and 19 songs. Carlo Chitagi. Flashback to somewhere in 1992. or 90s, early 90s. I was head of physiology at the Ruhuna medical faculty, and I always invited Carlo as an examiner for our viva voce examinations. He made the journey willing to go all the way, willingly and joyfully. One day he came into my room and said that he had a present for me. He presented me with his Kalochita Gi in the old cassette form produced by Sri Lanka, which was released in 1992. Subsequently, he also presented me with the CD Rattaranduwe, which is seen here. Kalochita Jivitayaka Gi Piyavara, Songs of a Lifetime. Much later, in 2006, which I still play often in my car on long, lonely drives. Of all his songs, the one that rings in everyone's ears is the title song, Rattaranduwe. His daughter must indeed be modestly happy with her vicarious popularity. There is no wedding in Sri Lanka now that this song is not played, more with nostalgic sadness than happiness of a joyful event. After stating the loss of happiness after she left on her wedding day, Giyada Patang Igila Kurulu Kuduwen Santoshayak Nasite. The second stanza goes, Igilila gosin Tanapu Kudu Atarang Navata Enna Piyambala Duwe. And he even seems impatient. Hanika Enna Piyambala Duwe. I found the tenor of this song a little bit disturbing. The emotions had a duality that didn't resonate with me. Was this not a lament of a possessive father? Once, when I had some time to have a personal chat with Carlo, I asked him as to why he wanted her to come back with her family. Didn't he want her to be independent and start a new life of her own? He said no, that was not his intention. I was not fully convinced. But he had redeemed himself with the final line. Avit yanna enna sududuwe. Pay us a visit off and on. His love for his daughter is one aspect of his personal love. Two compositions that I pick here express his love for his life's companion in the most unusual manner. In one he tells us, Koida kiya, manda kiya, nodena avemi, divigamane, mage yeheli, sondura obavini. Pemehi rasat, ehi palayat, oben ugatimi, divi himien, hadabatien, obata pindemi. See how beautifully he brings out the fateful chance meeting of a loved one. The sensuality, pemehi rasat, and the ensuing build-up of a family, ehi palayat. And then he combines it, the heartfelt selflessness of that love. But in that happiness, he doesn't forget the impermanence of life and love. The song ends with a melancholy, sad tone. Notira love, viraha duke, andura himivini, maru katare, sulanga lese, taniva pitavemi. So in the height of his happiness, he never forgets the impermanence of life. The next song is in contrast. Ruduru turu vadule, thiunu katu atare, dilena siumeliye, obai jivana suwanda denne, rosa kusuma mage. The beautiful analogy of a rose amongst thorns, compared with the vicissitudes of life, and the meeting of a beautiful loved one amongst the life's pain and the cruel jungle of life, is what he says in that song. Again, happiness is there, but the impermanence is there. The cruelty and the vicissitudes of life, the thorn is there amongst the rose. Okay, time is passing quickly. So let me get on to the song and more importantly, the lyrics that resonated with me most. They are expressions of his humanism and both political and spiritual philosophies. His life's philosophy that he kept with him to the end of his days. There are many in this genre, but I will quote only one. The one that resonated in me most was this, in the sonorous voice of Pandit W.D. Amaradeva. Kanna andinnata, inna hitinnata, හැකිනම් මිතුරේ ධනයට ඇයි දැඩි ආශා. සත්‍යය, යුක්තිය, සෙනෙහස, නිදහස ඇතිනම් මිතුරේ මොනවද නැත්තේ? නැතිනම් මිතුරේ මොනවද ඇත්තේ? It is the deepest philosophy of the Buddha entwined in socialist philosophy. Tanha, Asha is what ultimately drives and binds us, humans, into avarice, depravity, aggression, violence, and ultimately depression and emotional and spiritual disillusionment. The words are enlightening, but yes, they also sound somber. So let me lighten you up a bit. Those who have listened to Amaradeva singing this song in the CD very carefully, I have listened to it numerous times, may not have failed to hear something that is humorous. When Amaradeva sings it in all seriousness, Kanna andinnata, inna hitinnata, හැකිනම් මිතුරේ ධනයට ඇයි දැඩි ආශා. He was slowly advancing in his age. Amaradeva. He distinctly enunciates dhanayata as tanayata. So the song goes, Kanna andinnata, inna hitinnata, හැකිනම් මිතුරේ tanayata ඇයි දැඩි ආශා. One day late in 2007, when I was giving Carlo a lift from Mathura to Colombo, I had invited him to deliver the convocation address of the external degree graduations on my invitation. I told him about the enunciation faux pas of Pandit Amaradeva. And surprisingly and unexpectedly, Carlo said, "Oh, I say, key parak api kiwada man's ta hariyata kiyanna kiyala." අපි ඒක දෙතුන් පාරක් රෙකෝඩ් කළා. ඒත් හරියට ගන්න බැරි වුණා. Mrs. Fonseka was also in the car that day. I wonder whether she remembers this part of the conversation Carlo and I had all the way from Mathura to Colombo. To deeply analyze the philosophy that underlies Carlo's songs in the CD Rattarandue would need a separate oration. Hence, I will stop with these two last contrasting songs. To my mind, the saddest, the most heart-rending one in this poetic ensemble is Chirani Due, a song that Carlo had composed, he once told me, in memory of a little daughter, or the little daughter, of a close friend of his son. The little one left this world soon after she came into it. She had a serious congenital heart defect, if I remember right. He read it as a poem at the funeral, and everybody there could not help but shed copious tears. Carlo describes this tragedy thus: Chirani, Chirani Due, Sasare Sulangak Lese, Aula Site Sene, Aya Sanin Gie. The beautiful voice and the rendering of it by Deepika Priyadarshini adds to the pathos and will undoubtedly bring tears to anyone's eyes, as does mine every time I listen to it. With these words, while these words evoke a deep sense of immeasurable loss and sorrow, what attracted me was his use of this tragic, untimely loss to leave deep questions on philosophy for all of us to ponder in the rest of that song. In a resonating, somber voice, Rohana Veerasinghe ends each of the three stanzas thus. Dukkha satye yatartheda me. Anatmavadaye tatu etta dosite. Anitya dharmaye swabhaveda me. Ponder that again. Dukkha satyaye yatartheda me. Anatmavadaye tatu etta dosite. Anitya dharmaye swabhaveda me. I leave you with 15 minutes of silence to ponder, to meditate. While these, the final one of the two which I said I will finish up with, is Mage Kirilli. It begins with a dismissive Yanna Giyave and then softens. Mage Kirilli Giyai Gilli. Adaren Bendi Mage Kirilli. The soft tilting tone, not tilting, lilting tone, suddenly becomes rough and angry again. Yanna giyave, yanna giyave. But later he mellows again. Ai ma kale adare, shokai mulai, shoke mulai adare. But yanna giyave becomes the continuing refrain. I was too curious about the reason behind this song to let it pass. So I asked Carlo one day whether he had lost in love at an early stage in his life. He said, yes, but not what you think. In my teens, I had a pet parrot. Or a myna, I don't know. One day the cage door was open and she had vanished, never to return. More than losing my parrot, I was angry about her betrayal, for leaving me desolate and lonely, leaving me without even a word of farewell, not caring what I felt. I was left emotionally drained. And therefore, that was the first song verse I ever wrote. It was written more in anger than sorrow at the loss of a beloved pet. Unknowingly, M.S. Fernando, almost in mocking contrast, talks of his parrot. Rasahar kabala, rankuduye tabala, ඇති කරන්න ගත්ත මාල ගිරවි අතහරින්න කියලා ඇයි කියන්නේ ඔහෙලා හිතුවද මා දාලා යයි කියලා. And he talks about all the freedom that the parrot is going to get, but he says she won't leave. Now this leaves a question: is there some socio-political philosophy embedded in these two contrasting outcomes? Is there some cynicism about womankind? Or does it say something about the confinement and constraints suffered by women in this patriarchal society, that they are in gilded cages, given nice food to eat, and they are willing to stay with you even when they can go out? So there is some interesting contrasting philosophy behind that outcome. But I'm digressing. That was not what I wanted to say. But I couldn't help but saying this. Carlo's forte in bringing Buddhist concepts into his simple, understandable lyrics is exceptional. The beacon of light Carlo shone on the teachings of the enlightened one who liberated mankind from blissful ignorance. With his teachings is unequaled for its simplicity. As I said earlier, that needs another oration. No, perhaps a thesis. Carlo breathed life into his poetically expressive and emotionally rich compositions, and in them lay his philosophy of life. Among the 19, there was one that I didn't like, because it was overtly political, almost sycophantic, paying obeisance to Dr. N.M. Pereira. Run mule N.M. Not N.M. It is sung Run mule N.M. I told him so, but he remained non-committal. I will wind down with a few thoughts about humanism, literature and medicine. Let me begin with a short personal narrative. I have repeated this in the last talk I gave earlier, but let me go through it very quickly to put it in context with what Carlo and I did later on. So, in my impressionable teens, I loved two books. Dr. A.J. Cronin's Citadel and Adventures in Two Worlds. Perhaps they also tell as to why I decided to become a doctor. Then there was this poem that was read to me as a young man by my father. A man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Any man's death diminishes me. It goes on, there's something in between, but it finishes this way. Any man's death diminishes me because I'm involved in mankind. And therefore, never sent to ask for him whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Now, I use this particular poem in an article I wrote. As a fourth year medical student, we had, I don't know whether Saroj remembers, we had a, a students' union magazine called the STET. And I wrote an article. Now this is January, April 1976. And I wrote this because even then as a medical student, I felt something essentially missing in our medical curriculum. And as Santushya quoted me earlier, this bones, blood and sinew is there in medical education, but at that time at least, thank God there is a medical department of Medical Humanities now, that human spirit was missing. So I was trying to bring in some kind of society into the medical student mindset. So I wrote this article which is titled Medical Student and Society. I won't bother you with the details, but at the end of this, I quote this particular poem. But let me just read that final two quick paras. We must learn to face realities and not be unyielding to changes taking place around us. We must show understanding with those who are weighed down by the burdens of life as we come across each patient's bed so that we make the lives of what we save worth living, and so on. So I wrote that as a fourth-year medical student. And when I met Carlo, physician, Marxist politician, lyricist, composer, rationalist, medical academic, and philosopher, I began to congeal my thoughts and see the medical world in a new light. It is in this new light, an enlightenment of sorts, that prompted me to think about a proposal as part of my training in medical education while at the Faculty of Medicine, Peradeniya, as a probation lecturer in physiology in 1981. Peradeniya had the first medical education unit in whole of South Asia. And I was fortunate to be there when Palita Bekon and Professor Jayakumar Raja were there. And this idea of mine to submit up this proposal was again another attempt to put the human spirit into medical education. The proposal was titled "An Attempt to Influence Medical Students to Become More Complete Doctors." It was a comprehensive proposal, including coursework and evaluation. Nothing came out of it. Who would even stop to listen to a newly recruited probationary lecturer about curriculum change? But I didn't lose hope completely. Flash forward 25 years to 2006. I had more authority by that time. I had just completed an unprecedented 9 tumultuous years as Dean, Faculty of Medicine, University of Runa. And it was not difficult for me to decide to whom to turn to when I decided to develop a module on humanities in medicine. I turned to Carlo. With his unstinted and enthusiastic support, I submitted proposal to the faculty IRQUE project. I used to call it the IRC project because it was an irksome project. Improvement of relevance and quality in undergraduate education. That was in 2006. In retrospect, I called it the Ruhun experiment in medical humanities and not the Ruhun experience. I described the experiment in great detail in a lecture on the invitation of Professor Saroj Jayasinghe during the early days of the Department of Medical Education. Hence, I will only present to you some visuals as to what Carlo and I did in the 2 weeks that we threw our students into a whirlpool of an alien subject, humanities in medicine. We hope that we would make some difference on how they will look at medicine and its practice in a world racing headlong, somewhat blindly, into technology and cybernetics. We even trained trainers, that is staff members, with the hope that we can sustain it. And we called staff members who are interested to be trainers in subsequent years. Well, we had very few volunteers. That indicated to me that everything was not going to be too good. So, you should have seen to believe Carlo's enthusiasm and pure joy, interacting with the students, being totally involved and absorbed, often forgetting the time limit set during those hectic 3 days, 15 hours in total, that we spent together. Each one of those pieces of literature and poetry was chosen personally by Carlo. I will present a sample here, and he discussed each with students in as much detail as time permitted. Here are some of those that we presented to the students. The experiment ended there. He died an unnatural death by neglect. I presume that this is what the Department of Medical Humanities in Colombo is doing today, with greater commitment, greater resources, and hopefully with greater success. But I need to go back for a last mention of his singular lyrical compositions that is found in Rattaranduve. His philosophy in the practice of medicine is also exemplified in song. The anthem he composed for the Faculty of Medicine, Calania. Whereas all university anthems that I have listened to extol the virtues and the grandeur of the institution, Carlo brings ethical, moral, philosophical foundations of medicine into the lyrics of that anthem. I wonder how many of the students and graduates of the Faculty of Medicine, Calania, if there are any here in the audience, have ruminated on these aspects. This is how it goes. Sarasaviyen iparani Calaniye, veda varamak apatai labenuye, roduk nivana dahama, eve ape dahama, matuda ape jivite. Note, roduk, kind emotion to the melody. He then tells us of the limitless expanse of medicine and its foreboding depths. Kelavarata dahamak, kelavarak dahamata tibedu, tibe nam eya dannawadu, etarak neti, metarak neti, patulak neti, sayurak veni. That is medicine. Kelavarak dahamata tibedu, tibe nam එය දන්නවාදු. එතරක් නැති, මෙතරක් නැති, පතුලක් නැති, සයුරක් වැනි. And then the anthem ends with a warning to us all that health and ill health is our common fate. And indirectly he imputes that doctors have their limits. Doctors are not gods, as some patients as well as doctors wish to believe. That cure is uncertain, and that in the final analysis, it is the philosophy of global medicine. This is how he ends. Suvayai dukai, podu iranamai, suva aniyatai, lo damai eai. That, my dear friends and colleagues, is the legacy that has been bestowed on us by this singular human, Professor Carlo Fonseka. Battery. He would have been appalled if I called him superhuman. Those of us who have the great fortune to know him, and to know him well and intimately, are indeed exceedingly privileged. To me, it has been, in a way, a life-defining opportunity. Lastly, in almost a postscript, I must tell you why I think Carlo and I gelled the way we did. Why our thoughts and feelings resonated on many things, often unknown to most others. He was a brilliant mind. I am, at best, a little bit above mediocre. He was a multi-talented Renaissance man. I had no innate talents at all. Then why did we click? Yes, we had some things in common. We were both medical professionals, medical academics, medical physiologists. But so are many. But more importantly, to both of us, and this is the point that I wish to make, we were also both Marxian socialists. We resonated in terms of political philosophy. The conversations we had on Marxism, the Sri Lankan left movement, the JVP and its violence, Saitam and Antare protests, and the international geopolitical dynamics were long and strong. We agreed, we disagreed, and we agreed to disagree. The last time we disagreed was when he went to town hall in support of the Antare protests against Saitam. He once yelled at me in annoyance, "You're thinking like a Stalinist." I replied politely, "That is not true, sir. I don't. You are saying that, sir, because you are a diehard Trotskyist." That, to my mind, in the final analysis, is what made our bonding that much stronger and definitely more enduring. But then, my friends, as the saying goes, that's another story. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of the third Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration 2023. To propose the vote of thanks, I now invite Dr. Santhushya Fernando, Senior Lecturer in the Department of Medical Humanities.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Department of Medical Humanities, I thank our chief guest, the Vice Chancellor of University of Colombo, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, for his presence here today. We deeply appreciate it, sir, since we know how incredibly busy you are. Next, I thank the wife of late Professor Carlo Fonseka, Mrs. Pearl Fonseka, family and friends who grace this occasion. As he lives in your hearts, so does he live in ours. We thank the orator of the third Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities, Emeritus Professor Susirith Mendis, who has shed the light of a polymathic beauty of the existence of Professor Carlo Fonseka. We thank you for sharing a part of your life with us here today and your bond to our great teacher, artist, thinker, rationalist, and academic. Thank you, sir, for this unforgettable day. We thank our Dean, Professor Vajira Disanayaka, who has extended unconditional support in the organization of this event, and on a wider note, for featuring and enabling medical humanities and the arts in the grand agenda of this faculty. Our affectionate thanks go to Professor Panduka Karunanayaka, Professor Diniti Fernando, Professor Priyadashini Galapatti, and Emeritus Professor Saroj Jayasinghe for their admirable support to make this event a success from the very beginning. Thank you, sirs and madams, for your light. We especially thank the Deputy Registrar, Mr. Ajitha Bandara, Deputy Bursa, Mrs. Himani Rajapaksha for their support, and the dedicated AV unit for their tireless work. We especially acknowledge our management assistants, Mr. Tushara and Mr. Prasad, for all the hard work done. Without the support of the unstoppable research assistants, Upuli, Pasan, Oshada, and Michelle, you would not have seen the artistic green elements of this event today. Thank you, RS. You are literally rock stars. We remember with gratitude the planetary health champions of the faculty who supported our green effort, especially Professor Taranga Thoradenia and our friends in the departments of biochemistry and medical education. The third Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration was open to the public for the first time this year. In this audience are fans, admirers, enthusiasts, intellectuals, artists, thinkers, and some legends. This is a true testament for the far-reaching, resplendent, inimitable life of Professor Carlo Fonseka. To this entire audience, we wish to say thank you, and let's make this an annual date. We are truly pleased that many students from our faculty are here in this audience today. Thank you, dear students. We are truly honored. You are the emissaries of the idea of Carlo Fonseka and his vision into the future. And I also thank Niket Karunaratne, who compared this event. Niket is a medical student at our faculty. Finally, I thank the tireless Head of Department of Medical Humanities, Dr. Santhushi Amarasuriya, who has meticulously planned this event and given leadership to this oration, which is a truly open event in its organization, sentiment, and joy. We want this oration to be as soft, humane, gentle, and thoughtful, much like Professor Carlo Fonseka, whom we commemorate today. Thank you all for this wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Ladies and gentlemen, this marks the end of today's proceedings. Please rise for the academic procession to leave the hall. Thank you and have a pleasant day.